uses every day, that various teams, we at Architect Now, we're a whole bunch of Agile teams, things that we have found useful over the years, over the last 1 year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. So tonight's going to be a wild night of me talking very fast and hitting a whole bunch of things. We are recording tonight. If you think of something else, anyone listening in on this, anyone here in person, if there's something else that I don't cover that you use day to day that you think is the greatest development tool that others should know about, please throw it into the chat in this Teams channel. We'd love to add it. So the things that I'm talking about tonight are not things that I found. Other people have shared with me, other people have recommended to me or my company, and we've used them and we love them. Some we use every single day, some not as much, but they're still extremely useful. But we are also open to other ideas. So please share those ideas. Quickly, contact information, I'll pop this up here. Alex and I'm going to call Alex up here to talk about some of this stuff, or at least be involved in some of these things. So here's our contact information. I don't throw this up here as a big sales opportunity. It's more, we love to hear your ideas. We love to talk to developers. So if there's something that you want to share after the fact, here's our email and here's our Twitter. I will say Alex is really trying to grow his Twitter following, and I do all I can to help him grow his Twitter following. So please, if nothing but sympathy, follow him on Twitter.
I don't tweet though, so.
He doesn't tweet. One other quick thing. Thank you for coming in tonight. At Architect Now, I am offering, as a part of sponsoring this meetup, some door prizes. If you're interested, we will raffle off a $100 Amazon gift card and a $50 Amazon gift card near the end of the talk. There's a QR code here. Please scan it. There's a quick form to fill out. We'll pick somebody randomly near the end of the night and make sure via email you get one. If you don't get this QR code right now, just hit us up in Teams and we'll make sure that you get the link and you can find it. With that, I'm going to start talking really fast. I do this all the time, those of you that know me. Tonight is going to be a lot of different tools. There is no method to the madness. There's no ordering to that in terms of what I mean. Everything that you hear about tonight is going to come from a document that I have right here. So this document is going to be shared with everyone, and it's all links. I did not, we didn't put, and some of these I'm going to skip over, some I just want to share with you. It'll come in the thing. I'm going to selectively pick them. There's too much going on here. And as I said, there's no method to the madness. There's a lot of things that I want to share. Some are tools, IDEs, some are libraries, NuGet packages, NPM packages. They are things that help our team. Some are just services that we use, some are APIs that we use. There's going to be a lot of moving parts tonight, and I'm going to try to move through them. But at the end of the night, if you are too worried about it, you're going to get all these links. If you see something and like, hey, I need to remember that, please, we'll make sure it's all shared with you. It's going to be shared through Meetup. We'll share it however you sign up. If you sign up for the giveaways, the Amazon gift cards, you'll get them there as well. So, and again, I tried to put them in some grouping. I started with Azure resources. This is because it was up here, then it goes into tools. Don't think that one is any more important than the other. I'm going to jump around and show them very quickly. Some I will have actually installed on my laptop and give a demo of. Some I'll pop up the URL directly from here and talk briefly about them, but there are so many of them, I'm going to go fast. So with that, I don't want to waste any more time. The first group in terms of the document is called Azure Resources, and these are things that my team likes. The first one is it's related to a developer, but it's something that we have found useful and I share with new developers. It's called the Azure Services menu. AzureCharts.com is the URL. Again, I'll share this link. A Microsoft employee built this outside. It was kind of his night, it was outside of his day job, but part of his day job, if you will. And I do share this. It's a great opportunity if you are new to Microsoft Azure. Everything tonight is not going to be related to Azure. It just happens to be the first group in my document. if you're interested in all the things that make up Microsoft Azure, this is a great link to play around with. So it's not a developer tool per se, it's more of an educational opportunity. You could see updates and trends, heat maps, what's used more or less, all updates in the last 6 months. They stack these things by AI and machine learning, compute, analytics, databases. What is the most talked about things in the Microsoft Azure space? You get in here to different SLA, regions, different types of solutions. If you are going to build Solution Explorer and you're going to build a website, they've got different ways of slicing and dicing the Azure stack, which is a great opportunity here. I'm not going to spend too much. If you want to know what's in different regions in Azure, every one of these things I'm hovering the mouse over tells you a little bit about. If I want to know, what's one? Azure Virtual Desktop. I can click on it. It will take you right into, each time I click on one of those highlighted regions, it takes me into the Microsoft resources specific to that. If you want to know what's in Central US or any of the Azure data centers, I just have it sliced that way. You want to get overview, different types of apps, different focus, different status if they're available, if they're not available, last month if they've had any issues. So totally random outside the thing to start with, but if you're new to Azure and you're interested in that, it's important. I do like that link. There's Azure, and some of these I'm going to skip over because I've got 100 things. I'm sharing all this with you. Azure pricing calculator. If you're new to Azure, please use that. I won't go into it too much. There's a migration assistant. If you're interested in migrating to Azure, just very briefly. Some of these I'm going to hit very briefly. Some I'll spend a little time on. This is one Azure migration database migration service. You can install this app and point it at your SQL server, or there are various things it'll point at. It will scan and it will tell you whether or not it's going to be easier or more complex. Essentially, it's helping you decide whether a migration to Azure is going to be an easy thing. So database migration service, it'll tell you if there's any risks, things that you need to compensate for. If not, it will actually help you go all the way to backing up your database and migrating it to SQL Azure or the various Azure SQL platforms. So that's another one they have there. More I could say about that, but I'm not going to spend too much time on any one of these. Front door API management, App Center, Azure Migrate. There's tons of different things here that are Azure related. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Azure stuff. I wish everyone here was going to Azure, don't get me wrong. The last one, and click through these links, Azure App Center, Migrate, they're great things. Azure Migrate will, they will scan your IIS, they'll scan your websites, they'll do different things, and they will tell you if how easy it would be to migrate your websites to Azure. They'll give you some overviews in that. But again, trying to run through these. Biggest one of these, Azure Bicep, but we'll use Terraform. Terraform, if you're not familiar with Terraform, Terraform is a big part, and I guess let me take this back to the top. Everything you're going to see tonight is kind of a slice of the pie that we use at Architect Now. I've used, my team uses, they've recommended, our customers have used. This is not every tool available to you. I'm sharing it simply to pique your interest and say, hey, these things exist. Terraform is a big part of our development process. Every one of our development teams uses Terraform, script all of our Azure infrastructure. It's part of our CI/CD pipelines, so it's our continuous deployment pipelines. We can spin up a complete Azure bunch of app services, Cosmos, SQL. We can we could spin them up, run unit tests, kill them right from some Terraform scripts. So Terraform is a massive infrastructure as code infrastructure. We've done talks on this in the past. We're big proponents of it. We love Terraform. There are some other options that do the same thing, but if you're new to Azure or the cloud, not specific to Azure, it also works on AWS or Google Cloud, but we use it in the Azure space. But we're a big Terraform shop. Please consider that. Even our Kubernetes clusters, all of our AKS or Azure Kubernetes service stuff is all scripted via Terraform, and built as part of our deployment pipeline. So when somebody does a commit to a certain branch, if there's a release that goes on from that branch, Terraform generates all of the production and does all the deployments for us. Terraform also goes as far as to generate all the private passwords. It is very rare, and security is going to come up in a lot of these things we're going to talk about here as I kind of run through tons of stuff. But security with Terraform, it's kind of weird. People are like, how do you keep your developers from knowing your production SQL Server passwords? Nobody at our company knows production SQL Server passwords. Me, anyone else. Terraform generates them randomly as part of the deployment. And they are just all of the configuration. Terraform generates a SQL Server with a random password, and then as a subsequent part of a script, also generates and embeds that generated password into app settings for all of our .NET or anything else. So the password is never seen by a human, and it's on a whole bunch of services. So nobody knows it. We don't know it. It's just auto-generated and scripted as part of our development pipeline, and which means a lot to it. We follow Microsoft's zero trust policy. We don't want any customer giving us any trust. Don't trust us at all. Don't give us any access to any of your environments, right? That we will, if we need access, we'll beg you for it in a limited capacity, and that's as far as we go. Terraform solves most of those issues. So if you're unfamiliar with Terraform, look it up. Azure Bicep is a newer, well, I wouldn't say newer, it's just an alternative to Terraform that does something different. If you're also in Azure and you know ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager, ARM templates would be another way of generating the same thing. They all kind of accomplish the same goal. All right, tools. And again, I'm running through a lot of stuff, and I'm going to go fast because there's a lot here. And you think we might have time, but we don't. Visual Studio Code. If you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, it is Microsoft's most used, installed, and utilized development environment they've had. I'm not going to show it. It's available. Please consider Visual Studio Code. Is that what we use at Architect now? 1 out of 25 developers might. We use JetBrains. I'm going to come back to JetBrains, but we still like Visual Studio Code. I'm not knocking it. It's available. Don't use Visual Studio. We are not Visual Studio fans. Visual Studio is not really, I say that, and I kind of say it mockingly, but it is true. If you're doing web development, .NET Core development, you're doing any modern development, Visual Studio Code is a better development environment than Visual Studio itself, which seems weird for me to say. People are like, oh, you're the Microsoft guy. But it's still a Microsoft tool, but go with code. We use, if you are using anything but Git in your source control, I do apologize because Git has kind of won the source control battle at this point. It's a Git world. I don't care whether you're using GitHub, Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, there's all kinds of ways to host your Git repositories. But if you're using a different sort, if you're using Subversion or anything else, it would be difficult for me to say you're doing it right. Git is the way to go. We use Azure DevOps. Most of our teams are very familiar with command line. If you're using Git, it's kind of command line focused. I'm kind of old school. I still like having a UI available. I'll do some command line. A few of these next links in this thing are Sourcetree, Git Kraken, Fork. These are all tools that you can pop up and see, you know, this is Sourcetree, for example. I can see, you know, my branching, my file status. Behind the scenes, they're just calling the Git command line, but if you're not a command line person, there's a lot of great tools out there that will let you visualize and do through a graphical GUI the things you want to do with Git. So I tend to like Sourcetree. Even though we use Azure DevOps, you can point Sourcetree, it's free. You don't have to pay anything. I will try to call out tonight as I run through some of these tools what they cost, at least as far as I know in terms of current things. But if your Git Kraken is another one, Fork is another one. They're all UIs that point you at a Git repo. You point them at a Git repo and they will give you a full graphical GUI. Everything you do from the command line still matters. If you do it from the command line, these UIs just refresh in real time. They'll show you all of the branching, they'll show you all of the merges, all the conflicts. They will do everything for you. So I do like these tools as well, and I recommend them. I don't want people to get I'm an old guy. I probably have, in my age, gotten a little too reliant on some of the UIs as opposed to doing it from a command line, but still, you learn a lot by seeing visually what happens in a Git repo. Postman, if you're doing any time of development in 2022, there's part of me that says there's probably an API involved, or I would hope there's an API involved, right? You are building REST APIs. I don't care whether you're doing .NET on the back end, React, and Azure Data Studio is going to be your SQL Server Management Studio. It's going to let you connect to Azure SQL, run your queries, save your queries, see your table, do your designs, all of that. Azure Storage Explorer is the same. They evolve, but I'm not even going to open them. But they are desktop apps. I'm on a Mac, by the way. It should be pretty obvious to most of you. If you're on Windows or Mac, these are cross-platform tools, so you can run them on any. But if you just want to get into blob storage, Azure Storage Explorer gets you into there. It gives you a nice desktop app, regardless of your OS, that lets you see what your files are out there, upload things, download things, delete things, completely manage it, as long as you can authenticate. In the same with SQL. Data Studio would be your SQL. Azure Data Studio is a full SQL, T-SQL code editor hitting Azure SQL. So it makes it very nice. It's your SQL Server Management Studio. Now you can also on Windows use SQL Server Management Studio to hit Azure SQL, but this is cross-platform and more of an open source way of doing it. I'm a big Redis cache person. There's a tool, again, some of these I'm going to run through very quickly, but if you are using Redis Cache, more people should be using, caching via a platform called Redis. What do you say now? Do what? Sorry, I'm getting a notification. Not sure what the notification is. I don't know. Come back to it. If you have Redis, there are some nice desktop apps to hit Redis in terms of, we run Redis locally in Docker images. We're going to come to Kitematic and some other things in a little bit, but if we're writing, I'm a developer and I'm running code and I have Redis, whether it's in the cloud or here, then we can turn around and run desktop apps that'll tell us everything in the cache. So some of these, again, I'm going to run through a lot and giving you all these Kitematics coming up. Who knew, by the way, in 2022, that we'd be fighting the Russians? Who actually totally unrelated, but similar. Who knew we'd be using command line tools? We're going to break out, but we do. Command line is becoming a bigger thing. Cross-platform, if you're on Windows, most people just open up a command line tool. If you're on Mac or you're on Linux machines, I use iTerm quite a bit. I use Commander. I use different command line terminal emulators that have all the Azure, CLI, PowerShell, all of those things. They're also built into Visual Studio. They're built into Visual Studio Code. They're built into JetBrains. It's a crazy thing, but command line is becoming more and more of a thing. The younger crowd that's coming out of college never knew that would exist. But yes, there's a lot more command line going on today than we ever thought would happen. My two favorites are iTerm and Commander. I won't go into Commander. Docker, for some reason my Docker did not open here a little bit ago, but we use Kitematic. I like Kitematic. It used to be the Docker. It's now, they started writing Docker Desktop. Everything is becoming a container today. Won't go into too much of a demo of this. We use Kitematic. Kitematic allows us, we use Mac. We also do SQL Server development. So there are Docker containers for Windows machines or Linux machines that have full SQL Server. All of that just happens on a Mac. We script everything and it's on a Mac. It's all in containers. Kitematic allows us to spin up. I can run a Redis cache, all these different microservices. When I say microservices, I'm thinking third-party things that I didn't even write, like SQL Server, like Redis, anything. Kitematic is the UI that allows me to see it and run it as Docker containers. It's just the front end of Docker. Now, the same company has turned around. This has become then they now have Docker Desktop and some other things, but we live in a containerized world, and Kitematic is one of those things that gives us a whole bunch of flexibility. These are all tools, by the way. I'm kind of in the tools section and going here pretty quickly, but the most money my company spent, I would guess the most money Architect now spends on development tools goes to JetBrains. JetBrains is our development tool of choice. It would be the equivalent of Visual Studio Code, any other thing. It's commercial, it does cost money. It's $30, $40 a month. There's different IDEs. We use one tool called Writer, which is .NET. It is the C# IDE. We use another tool called WebStorm. Every new developer that starts at Architect now, we buy a license to Writer and to WebStorm, and it's a subscription service. My team swears by it. They like it a lot more than Visual Studio Code. JetBrains is the company. I don't know how many are familiar with them, but they also did ReSharper. They've done a lot of tools in the past for Visual Studio, but we swear by this tool set, and I believe, I should know this as the guy that pays the bills, but I believe we pay them more money every year than we pay for any other raw development tool. They are the biggest, they are our IDE. JetBrains, this is Writer. It looks like Visual Studio. It's not rocket science. Whoops. Whoops, sorry, wrong keyboard. Guess what? It has IntelliSense. It does the same stuff. It hits, breakpoints. I know some people are like, well, I have Visual Studio. I have Visual Studio Code. It does the same thing. I can write code and I can do this. They're all, to some degree, I can come in here and see my, breakpoints and do everything. If you're not familiar with Writer, and I don't make any money, I'm not, sold on them, other than every single developer that works for me swears by this tool set. So take that as you will. I've used them for years. Straight IDE. Now every NuGet package, they've got everything Visual Studio does. I would argue these people do better. The only thing that Microsoft has that might even compare is Visual Studio Code with all the plugin ecosystem and the open source ecosystem. These guys kind of follow along those lines. So I will say that in terms of, I don't want to go too far down just a Writer WebStorm path. You can also use their same tool set goes into C++, C, Kotlin, PHP, Python, any other language you might use, this company has something for. Again, going quickly here, running through a lot of these. Some of these I'm more familiar with than others. Mapping generator, it's a tool, not a library, so I didn't include it in the library section. What I mean by a tool is if you are writing mapping, you're taking some type of C# class and mapping it to another. There are tools I'm going to come to later, like AutoMapper, where it'll use reflection and do that at runtime. It'll say, hey, I can map this to that. There are also tools like mapping generator where you can do it at design time. So you point it at source code and say, it'll scan your source code and it'll say, I want to take this class over here and I want to map certain properties to this class over here, and I will write the code to do it, as opposed to you manually writing that code. This is a commercial tool, but it's pretty powerful. You can come in here and do all kinds of configuration options and settings on how it converts and what it does to go from this data type to this data type. And ultimately what the output is C# code. So it writes you a mapper. This object in, this object out, and it does everything that you configured it to do here. There's no reflection, so if you need sheer performance, this is a handy tool to do that kind of thing. Now I got some GitHub links here as well. The next two are low-hanging fruit in our team because we just assume everyone knows about them, but most people don't know about them. It came up in interviews in the last week. I've talked to more developers that didn't know this exists. Our teams at Architect now, we're an Angular shop. Even React. We do Angular and React, but primarily Angular, some React. But we're building front-end TypeScript, JavaScript applications that are hitting a back-end API. The back-end API typically is going to be .NET Core, some type of REST API, Swagger-enabled API, Swagger's coming up, or it's going to be a Node.js back-end API. That's kind of our stack. You got a front end, a rich browser-based front end. Even if it's not a browser-based front end, it could be Xamarin or iOS, Android native stuff. It's something thick, client, desktop app over here, back end with an API. A significant amount of our customers handwrite all of the proxy code on the front end. They build the API, great, I got an API, it's REST or it's not, it's procedural. They handwrite all the code on the front end to call that back end. All of the reads, writes, puts, they handwrite all of the classes that are the models. They're sending, I'm going to post a person, then I'm going to get a person, I need to handwrite them. I got a C# class over here called person, and then I got a TypeScript class over here called person. They have to keep the properties of those two things in sync. If you use Swagger or OpenAPI, and you build an API that exposes a Swagger document, these next two tools are extremely useful. You can point nswag as a command line tool. We do this as part of our build process to your Swagger API, and it'll generate all C#, TypeScript, JavaScript, whatever client you have. It'll look at your API Swagger doc, and it'll generate a proxy to make all the calls with all of the exception handling, all of the asynchronous code, everything for you. So if somebody changes a property of person, they went from first name to name first over here on the server, they build and compile, somebody runs nswag or what was the other one? We use nswag. AutoRest is similar, they're just similar type deals. It will automatically regenerate code on your client app that matches that entire API and handles all the API calls in seconds. And we've used it for 7 years. We didn't realize people hand wrote their own proxies. It's always been so easy to us that we find it strange when people handwrite them. And they spend significant amount of time handwriting client-side proxies. It'll generate, we use it for Xamarin or Maui or whatever it is today. We use it for TypeScript, we use it for React, we use it for Angular. It could be a WinForms app. If we're calling an API, we do not write the proxy to call that API. It's all generated by an nswag, or their competitor here is AutoRest. I would say competitor, but it's similar type deal. So you can use AutoRest. It's a thing that you point at a RESTful API, it'll generate client-side code to call. So extremely easy to do. If you're unfamiliar with those tools, please look at those tools. Big part of our development environment, and most of our developers, you get younger people that have never worked outside of an environment where that's a thing, and they're like, hey, this is crazy. And there's an nswag. Somebody just popped in here into the Teams chat. There is a Windows UI for nswag as well. You could run the Windows app, point it at a URL with the Swagger endpoint. It'll generate it there. We do the command line side, but there's a Windows app to do it as well. I actually bring that up in interviews. I brought it up today in interviews. I asked a guy, he's like, I handwrite all my own APIs. And he talked about it for a while. And honestly, he was just talking himself into a hole, because I'm like, I'm going to talk tonight about a tool that you could write one little command line that's really simple. nswag URL, it will generate everything you just talked about doing for a month. So it is what it is. Security, don't write your own security. And this isn't the only one. I didn't bring in any more of this. When I say don't write your own security, there's Azure Active Directory. There's all kinds of different security. There's Auth and different providers out there that are third-party commercial APIs that do security. We have lived for a long time with Identity Server. We have a lot of customers with Identity Server. And I did not add this, Alex. Please throw it out to me. What is their competitor, the one that's self-hosted?
Keycloak by Red Hat.
Keycloak? Keycloak is another one. I didn't put Keycloak in here. Auth0 and Okta are now the same company. One bought the other. Do not write your own user database with your own password encryption or any of that. These are all options. Identity Server is one we've used forever. It's an open source. Now they have a third party. I wouldn't say third party. They have a commercial version, but we use Identity Server, Keycloak. If we're doing a secure app, and it doesn't just use Azure Active Directory natively, then we will load up a container and configure Identity Server to do. And Identity Server does all of the authentication. It does your login screen, it does your change password, it does your two-factor authentication, it does everything. It offloads every aspect of security outside of your app. And it's an OAuth provider. So people log in to the Identity Server UI that you configure. You can set up different attributes for users and do stuff. Once they log in, it becomes an OAuth provider, just like anything else. So we are not, we're responsible for choosing this tool or tools like it, but we are not responsible for, I mean, it is a secure OAuth database. So security sits over here in SQL Server or Mongo or Cosmos, whatever database we choose for Identity Server. It has plugins for different databases. It's its own database. So users are stored over here, encrypted and secured using industry best practices. Our app is simply authenticating against that. We have not written our own user security in years. It's all through a third-party service. If we don't want to just pay for one over here like an Auth0, we use Identity Server quite a bit. And many of our largest customers are Identity Server platforms. Frameworks. Now we get into a little lower level code stuff. And I kind of group these randomly. So some of these, again, I'm going to run through. We use HangFire quite a bit. HangFire is our, asynchronous backend. It is we write .NET code on the server, you make a call and we want to do something asynchronously instead of popping things onto an Azure queue or whatever it might be. HangFire is a plugin we use to do fire and forget jobs, delayed jobs, queue jobs, recurring jobs. It's a library, it's open source. There's also a commercial version. We have Walmart is one of our customers that uses the commercial version. They pay X amount and it has persistent backend. So if something restarts, it keeps the jobs open. So it's a very nice tool. It does batch jobs, batch continuation. We're big into HangFire. It has a UI that you can come in here and see job times, and these jobs are all popping through. A lot of our larger apps use HangFire. We've had great success with it. Now, could you write this just using Azure queues, or there's other platforms that do this? Yes. If you need fire and forget or asynchronous jobs, a lot of things like somebody's uploading a file. We upload a file, we pop it into Azure Storage, we pop a message onto a HangFire queue, and then we return to the user and say, we're ready to go. The HangFire queue gets it, processes it, sends it back. But HangFire is a big job for us. It's a tool that we use frequently. Ceralog is, there's a lot of built-in .NET Core, .NET 6 logging infrastructure. We like Ceralog. We've used all the Ceralog syncs for SQL or Mongo. Our go-to, and it embeds in .NET Core very easily. It's a NuGet package. You can also use Ceralog in Node and other platforms. It's not .NET specific, but we're a Ceralog fan. We use it in a bunch of things. You pop messages on and it persists them very fast and in asynchronous fashion. Poly, I'm going to skip the Poly project. I use Poly quite a bit, but Poly does some crazy stuff. And I'm amazed that more people don't know what Poly does. Poly is a transient fault handling library in .NET. It's a NuGet package. You add it. Weird thing about Poly is it isn't a runtime package. It's a design time package. It scans your code at build time. So I use Poly. Remember when we used to have to do iProperty changed events for WPF or Xamarin, and you had to, if you did a .NET property like a name, you had to do the get and the set. And on the set, you had to raise a property changed event. Poly is an example of what it does. You can load Poly and add a policy. Poly will scan your code every time you run. It will look at every property that you have and convert it to iProperty change and embed that code. That's one example of what it does. It also, the thing that people like about it now isn't so much that, because we don't build WPF apps like we used to do, but now it's fault tolerance. So you can come into Poly and say, I want to add a policy at the top of my .NET code at startup, and you can handle every SQL exception and do something. You can handle, it'll do retries, it'll do delays, it'll retry every 30 seconds. Poly embeds code at design time when your code compiles to perform these things. It isn't a thing that happens at runtime. Poly is extremely powerful. It'll do a retry, and every if you got this exception, it'll do a retry every 10 seconds if you wanted it to do that. You do that one line of code and it just does it across all of your .NET code. It's crazy. So if you know how to use Poly, it is quite the deal. It'll retry forever. It'll just keep retrying. And some of these go on, you can add times and, do it every 10 seconds. Say there's certain things like a database connection that, the database isn't going to go down for an hour, right? It's going to go down for a few seconds. It could be a blimp. I just need to retry. 10 seconds later, it's going to be back up. Poly, it allows you to do that. So I can do wait and retry, retry one every 1 second, 2 second, 3 second from then. So we use Poly quite a bit. It's a handy resilience framework. Now I just explained two different scenarios for it because it's embedding code. One is resilience, like exception handling. One is, I'm taking every get and set and making it iNotify property changed if you want to do that. But Poly does a lot of stuff. When I'm doing mobile apps in Xamarin, Poly is a big thing. Quickly, I don't use Mediator as much anymore with HangFire, but Mediator, my buddy Jimmy Bogard, Mediator is an in-memory pub-sub eventing platform. So doesn't use Azure, doesn't use RabbitMQ or all these other different things that are out there. It's in memory and very fast, very low fault. But if you want to follow that pattern, Mediator's a thing. I put this in here because I just used it not too long ago. If you need to generate Excel spreadsheets or any Word docs, there's a company called IronExcel. These guys are commercial. They're not open source. They're not free. You pay them a couple $100s a year. Honestly, for the value that I got out of doing some of this, generating Excel spreadsheets that are complex, the value add for these guys is extremely low. It was nuts at how easy I could generate multi-tab spreadsheets with functions and to do all this in C#. They have C# libraries. They are commercial. They're a NuGet package with a serial number to do it. But by the time I got done with them recently, I'm like, that was well worth the money for what I paid. I would never be able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So I'm not the guy that's going to sit up here in any of these as I run through them and tell you that free is the way to go. There are times if you can get it free, do it. There are times where for the amount of money some of these people charge, please pay them. Handlebars, I use Handlebars for all my template processing. Handlebars is a .NET library that converts, it will convert a string like this with Handlebars. It'll replace all the .NET stuff. You pass in an input object and get a source, and it'll do all of the string replacement for you. I've used Handlebars very successfully on many projects to do email templates, push notification templates, things like that. It allows me to do all the strong HTML or some type of other syntax, and then use the Handlebar syntax in the middle, and it replaces everything for me. So I like handlebars.net. It's a NuGet package, very easy to do. AutoMapper, back to the mapping tool I said earlier. AutoMapper this is runtime. You give me a person object and a person model, and if they have some syntax, they both have name first, name last. It'll map them by name, but if you have some fancy mapping you want to do, AutoMapper is a NuGet package to convert from one object to another. And it will build the mapping once via reflection, and then you can reuse it, and it generates all the runtime code. So I don't want to say it's slower than the other tool, but it does take that initial hit to generate the mapping, and then you can reuse the mapping over and over again. And your mappings are very complex. If you need to go from a complex, you got a flat object with 100 properties over here, and you got some hierarchy over here that has, I've got a person with multiple addresses. You can go from a flat to a complex nested object, and it'll map and do all of that stuff for you. So AutoMapper is very powerful there. Fluent validation, like Fluent validation, again, some of this is my own personal. If I want to validate an object like I have here, customer validator, I want to set up some rules. This can't be empty. This is not empty, but if it is, I want to throw an exception that says, please specify a first name. You can set up a mapper in Fluent validation, so it uses a Fluent syntax to do that. I use Fluent validation for most of my APIs, so the object models come in. Fluent validation gives me a very consistent way of setting up validators for my data models. All right, Those are random frameworks, again, running through a whole bunch of stuff. Now I'm going to run into a miscellaneous section. Some of these I'll go through very quickly. Some I'll spend a little time on. 12-factor apps. Alex and I were in here doing a Azure workshop a couple months back. Too many people do not understand what this is. If there's one takeaway out of everything tonight, I would argue that this might be it from me. Please go to 12factor.net, 12 being the number. This is how to build software. 12-factor apps is 12 concepts. If you go through them, it's not specific to .NET. It was actually designed.
By Heroku. Andrew Wiggins?
Heroku, the Heroku guy. You get into code base, you've got one code base that ultimately deploys to production, staging, developer 1, developer 2, right? These, to some of you, this may seem like the most common sense thing in the world. Everyone has done this for so long, but to others, it's not so straightforward. So dependencies being, let me get into config. Store config in the environment. They got nice, they don't have nice pictures. Some of these had pictures. I used to steal the pictures out of these. Config, store the config in the environment. They're pretty straightforward concepts. Most of, if you just follow .NET Core or Node, or you're following best practices in a development platform today, they're likely going to follow this anyway, but it might just, tip you off like, oh, that's why they made that decision. That's why we store stuff in app settings. So we, port binding, concurrency, scaling out, I can scale out multiple, I could scale multiple web instances, multiple worker processes. It's fascinating to read this. If nothing else, spend an evening, spend a couple hours reading through all of these. It's going to trip a light bulb. We talk about it a lot in a lot of our talks, 12-factor apps. Trunk-based development, we used to follow Git flow. I will tell you, we follow trunk-based development. If you're a Git aficionado, like I said earlier, if you are doing anything but Git, you're probably doing it wrong. I hate to say that, but it's probably true. If you follow Git can be used, it's a hammer, right? It can be used in any number of ways. This is the way we used it. We follow a trunk. There's a massive amount of documentation on a best practice for Git-based development teams to release production software. This is all of your hot fixes, your production releases, how it works, every step on what developers do or do not commit to various branches, how a hotfix might go, everything along those lines. We follow trunk-based development. This is a URL that simply gives you some tips on how that works. Miro, this is a miscellaneous section, by the way. Miro is the second most spend that I probably have every month on a credit card in terms of my development teams. We swear by Miro. When COVID hit and we went 100% remote, we used to sit in here, we have whiteboards, we have boardrooms here on the corner, we have 3 more up the hall, we have a lot of dry erase boards. We have this big white one here, we had a lot of developers that sat and did design. We sat in person and we did it all in person. With COVID, we were no longer able to do it in person. We find this tool to be the best for all of our agile ceremonies, our whiteboarding, our mock-ups, our prototypes. And it's commercial. Again, I paid money for it. I don't want to hide that. But we can come into a Miro board and manage a development team, and every single one of my teams lives in this tool. This is everything they do. Not everything. They're over coding. We use Azure DevOps. That's also part of our stack. Our backlog, our CI/CD pipelines, our Git repos are all in Azure DevOps. Outside of Azure DevOps, this is the biggest tool. They're in here managing everything. Just sticky notes, mock-ups. Our customers all have access to our Miro boards. It's a big part of our development environment. We love Miro at Architect Now. We used to use, I'm going to skip Lucid Charts. Lucid Charts does something similar to Miro. We would use Lucid Charts for mockups and things like that. We quit doing as much. If you're interested, the links here. We moved on to Miro for the same thing, but if you're interested, Lucid Charts is a very cool tool for doing some similar stuff. We just found that Miro is a little better. This is also miscellaneous. Cypress, we build web apps, Angular, React, Cypress is a big part of our testing platform. So we have multiple people on different teams that are doing nothing every day but writing Cypress tests. They write them, and there's plugins to your browser. There's they commit these scripts. The plugins are like, visit this URL, wait 100 milliseconds, get this image, click it, wait. So they're writing it in this weird syntax, but it's extremely efficient. And once they get it, they can automate tests. Now, this isn't a unit test. It's, unit testing a class in code. This is a front-end plugin. Cypress sits on top of Selenium and a bunch of the industry standard testing frameworks, and it just automates it in a way that makes it so much easier for anybody to use. So we do a ton with Cypress. Complete end-to-end testing. Dashboard setup. There's a commercial. We do not pay that I know of for any of the commercial stuff. We've always used the free npm install Cypress. You get this nice plugin. You can write these nice scripts and see it. You can run it. Cypress helps. We do a lot of Angular development, so it works with all your SPA frameworks and does all of that, and life is pretty easy. Yeah, pizza in the back, feel free to get up. Another one I talk about a lot is Macaroon. This one has actually been there for the last 8 or 9 years that I've given this talk, Macaroon. And sometimes, I hate to age people, I'm the old guy anymore, but younger, newer developers to our industry, I hate to say younger, they build something and you have a database and you have some dummy data in it, and you write code against that dummy data and you think that your code is perfect. The reality is, once that code goes into production, your dummy data was inadequate in terms of size for actually what was expected, right? You did a search, you did a select star from this table, and the table might end up with 1 million rows in it. And you never anticipated that when you wrote it because you just haven't thought about that. Macaroon is a tool. We actually pay for it, but you could come into Macaroon and generate dummy data. It'll generate random anything. Name, email addresses, genders. Look at all the different things. It'll generate car models, catchphrases, colors. You can set Macaroon up to generate anything. It'll output CSV files, Excel files, whatever you want. There's an API for it. So we seed our databases with hundreds of thousands of rows of dummy data. So we're able to tell early on in development if our code is crap, because we know there's 100,000 rows in there. There isn't just Mickey Mouse is the one row and it seems like it's going to do something. We use it'll generate dummy credit card numbers, currencies, DUNS numbers, drug names. Some of this just doesn't, I don't know who'd use it. We've not used all this, but you can generate. The difference between paid and free Macaroon is, I think free only does like 1,000 rows, paid will do millions. So we generate and seed databases, multiple tables. We come in here and generate Macaroon and seed them. So early on in the development cycle, somebody could fill a development database with a massive amount of data with Macaroon. Sorry, switching back. Mailtrap. Mailtrap is another huge thing we use every single day on our development teams. Mailtrap is so here's a common scenario as a developer, right? You build an app and one of your things is you have to register users and the user requires an email. So what did we do in the past? We just kept coming up with dummy emails. We would come up with different Gmail accounts or Yahoo accounts or stupid stuff. And then when you went to send emails from your app, it was always tricky because you had to be really sure about what development, test, and stage. You didn't want to accidentally send your production users emails. You might want to see what it looked like, but you didn't want to physically send it. Mailtrap is a third-party tool we pay for, and there's another one I'll show you in a second that you can self-host. But Mailtrap, what we do is in our config settings, in our app settings, we point our SMTP servers to Mailtrap instead of a production SMTP server. So no matter what email we send, it never actually sends. It goes into Mailtrap. And then all of our developers have access to log into Mailtrap and see the email, see all of the email settings, test it on different mobile devices, test it in different browsers to see what the HTML would look like. And it just keeps emails from actually leaving our test environments and going anywhere. So every app that we have, Mailtrap is a critical piece. All of our customers have access to it. Hey, I logged in as Joe Schmo at architectnow.net, and instead of Joe Schmo getting it, it goes to Mailtrap and the developer can see the result. So it gives them the ability of catching it, looking at it, confirming it. When we go to production, our configuration setting per 12-factor apps says that the SMTP server is now a production SMTP server, it goes out. But at that point, we should have confirmed it through Mailtrap. But we use Mailtrap on every app that we use that sends email.
There'll also be feedback on spam and all kinds of
Yeah,
stuff.
they'll say, hey, this is spam ready. It gives you a ton of actual feedback. Another option, if you don't want to pay for Mailtrap, and it's not super expensive, is Mailhog. Mailhog is a self-hosted Docker container that you can run yourself if you have the ability to host it, point your email at it, but it does very similar stuff. It, gives you you send email, you point your SMTP server at it, it traps your emails, and it just doesn't have the detail and the throughput as Mailtrap, but they both do the same thing. One is self-hosted, one is a third-party API that you sign up for. Mailtrap we use on everything. When have we used Mailhog? I know we used it one, I don't remember.
Customers that had trouble Mailtrap approving.
Speaking of enterprise customers, Localized, if you're into localization, we have a couple big customers use Localized. It's a third-party service, does all your translations. It does there's an API, it converts. You can give it resource files in English and it'll convert them all. It costs money, but there's an API that'll convert them all to any language you want. You pay for the languages. You can read the resource files back. You can embed it as part of your development lifecycle. And you can, it doesn't replace all the keys in your UI. You have to do that yourself, but it'll generate all the resource files in different, whether it's JSON or anything else for you to convert it. So if localization is a thing, look at Localize. Browser Stack, spend a lot of money with these people. Anyone here use Browser Stack? Browser Stack is a device testing platform. It's not unit tests like XUnit or Cypress, or it's not testing your code. What Browser Stack does, it allows you, if you have customers, and we do get these, that really want to test on Windows XP and IE6, Browser Stack allows me to go, there are VMs in the cloud with Windows XP on any version, and I can load up any browser that was ever supported on that operating system and test something. It will spin up physical iOS or Android devices in the cloud, tablets, phones, any version. It will allow me interactive cross-browser testing on a massive amount of devices. You can do device testing. It's crazy what you're able to test. Now, I will admit 100%, we pay for this and then we don't, and then we pay for it and we don't, because it gets a little pricey depending on how many people you're doing testing, but it's kind of like Netflix. As a sports guy, for years, I would want to watch the Big Ten Network, so I'd pay for Hulu, and then I'd pay for it through football season, then I'd cancel it. We kind of treat Browser Stack like that when we need it, and we need all of these different devices and all these different browsers because the customer wants to test something. We spin it up, we pay for it, we do that for 2-3 months, and then we turn it off. They have no long-term subscriptions, but you can automate through them. You can do Cypress through them. You can do all kinds of stuff. But they have more device platforms than I've ever seen. If you want to go back to Windows 8, there's Windows 8 with Safari, an old Safari on a random Windows machine. And it physically loads you a VM with that, and you can test, and you can automate that. So Browser Stack is if you need it, and it'll take screenshots on failures. You can script stuff. They go pretty hardcore with it. We actually do like their tool. But it does get pricey, and it's kind of weird. I hate to say I pay them and I don't, but I do. That's how it works. DNS Checker, back to the email above. If you're sending emails, or we do a lot with, emails are going to come up here in the MX thing in a second, but we do a lot of Azure, AWS, things like that. We're always checking to make sure, is this issue because there's a DNS record that's misconfigured? There's some nice tools to come in here that you could just enter anything and it'll search and tell you all of your DNS settings. If we change something, we have to wait the hour or two. You can come in here and tell a lot about that. Nice tool. 1Password. Anyone here use 1Password? This is our password manager of choice. We use 1Password for everything. We have 3-4 development teams of 4 or 5 developers that all work for different customers. Huge customers, small customers, customers every shape and size. Those customers, we prefer that we don't get any access to their production environments. We're a share nothing, trust nobody. Don't trust us. We ask them, don't trust us. Don't give us any of your production stuff. We will teach you not to trust us, only because that's just the nature of the world today. But we still have access to some development environments, some other stuff. So when a new Architect Now employee starts, we have 1Password set up. It's available to every employee. We have vaults, term vault set up for every customer. And so we have development passwords and usernames or any credentials for anything set up in a vault for that customer. I can assign that access to a development team member that needs it. And then when they leave, we can do one-time passwords. It'll ensure that we never reuse a password. We have them for our commercial, our corporate level stuff, our operation stuff. 1Password is on my phone. It's on my iPad. It's here. We can share like DevUp. We do a conference. All of our stuff's in 1Password. I can share it with specific people. There's a few other competitors to 1Password. Even if you don't like this one, think of something like it. We live in a weird world. Everything should be 2-factor authentication. It should be one-use passwords. It's crazy, but we like 1Password. People come and go. Even if they just switch teams, I want to remove them from this vault and add them to this vault so that they do what?
Check for data breaches.
Yes, it checks for data breaches. It checks for everything for us. We like one. They give us periodically the company 1Password. They do webinars for our team. They give us all kind. If there's like something that goes on in the world, they'll come in and teach everybody. We're an enterprise customer and we like the tool. MX Password. Again, it's a quick one. If you're doing emails and your emails, whether you're using a third-party suite or something else, your emails aren't getting accepted or they're going to spam, MX Password's a great way to test your domain. It'll check all your DNS records and make sure that your DNS is set up right. Your MX records are set up so that your email is going to get accepted. It's not a silver bullet, but it helps in the overall thing. Themes. We cheat. I hate to say this, but we do not design all of our UIs manually. If you're building an Angular, React, HTML, WordPress, whatever you're doing, if you're building a web UI, and if you don't have the capability of all of the front-end design work that makes it look super polished, please cheat like we do. We use ThemeForest, or as one of my ex-customers called it for years, and then we just felt bad about correcting him, ThemeForest. However you say it, Sean Connery. We use ThemeForest. If you come here, and what I mean by this, if you go to like admin templates, for example, I'm just picking a random one. I don't know any of these. I'm just picking the very first one that comes out. $16 to use this thing. This is what it looks like. Let me go down here. I don't know this thing from Adam. It's the first thing that came up on the website. This is how the navigation works. This is how the dashboard works. They've got, now I picked a healthcare one, happened to have healthcare data. You could use this for anything. You don't have to use it for, all it is HTML with Bootstrap enabled. You can get them with, that are already Angular components on modern Angular or React or any other framework. Start with this, change the colors, change the logo, let your company use it, let your customers use it. You'll look like, the greatest UI designers, and guess what? You've spent nothing. We do it all the time. So some of these styles, different grids, how forms look, how data entry looks, how drop downs look, multiple select, you're just ripping off all these little UI elements and starting. So ThemeForest or the MeForest, however you want to think about it, is a huge one. And again, I went through, to get to that, you can do WordPress, but I always go to HTML admin templates because it has the most stuff and it's kind of the back-end admin. If that's the type of thing you're building, you're going to get the most rich UI from HTML admin templates. A competitor is Template Monster. Very similar. You can come into Template Monster. Now they have WordPress, all the different PowerPoint templates, but HTML, if you're coming from scratch. Like here's another one, Monstroid. I just picked this randomly. The other reason I like these is most people, the people that put this together, they're building the templates. They've also put a lot of time and thought into the responsiveness of it. So it works on iOS, it works on Android tablets. So I could come in here and see this particular site. I can see different header layouts. Now here's a website that Template Monster lets me switch to mobile. You can also just do this in Chrome or Edge or whatever browser you're using. But I could see how a different website would look laid out and different things. So save yourself or your customer a lot of time by just cheating and using it. I hate to say cheating and using a template. We use templates for a lot. Same with email. I like these email templates. And there are more sites than this, but here's a link that I included. We send a ton of emails. We had services that send emails. Emails go out and do stuff. Emails are not as easy to send as just plain text. Hello, Kevin, do this, thank you, Joe, right? Emails now are opened on every device. You have to think about the browser, what client is showing the email. There are responsive best practices. This is a site that we use to do some basic layout. You can look at these. I mean, even at its basic, this is it. This is what the email HTML looks like. I know that looks cheesy. It's got a brown or a gray top and it's got a footer, but ultimately there's a lot of thought that goes into all the CSS to make that particular email look good. In the Gmail, Hotmail, every type of client they handle, right? So if you just want the most basic platform to do an email, start with something like this, download the HTML, use that in your code, and replace all this text because they've handled all the layout for you. If you just send out raw black and white text, it's going to look cheap. So we spend a lot of time not only on the theme and the style of the front end, but we do emails as well. A few I'm going to skip. Chocolatey. You're all Windows, I assume. Most people are Windows. I guess somebody had a Mac here. If you're Windows, Chocolatey is a great package manager to install all your software. We have Chocolatey scripts for people that are Windows. We don't do much Windows, honestly, weirdly. But when we did, we had Chocolatey scripts. I could give a new developer a Chocolatey script. They could just run it. Think of it like a Homebrew or Brew or things on a Mac. It's going to install any site. It'll automatically install Office and whatever you want. Visual Studio, and it'll completely set up a Windows machine. You can manage it as a package manager. Homebrew's the Windows or the Mac version of that. Swagger, I talked about this earlier. If you're not doing Swagger enabled APIs, please do. It's very easy to do. It should be plugged into most of the new templates in .NET Core. We handle it, but Swagger APIs allow for things like NSWAG I talked about earlier. Swagger is a big part. We wouldn't build an API without it. If you want to build a Windows app today, you could do Maui, if you've heard of Maui. But if you don't want to do Maui and you want to do it right, almost, I would look at Electron. Electron is, I know probably Microsoft people suing me on here, but Electron is a framework for building cross-platform desktop apps. You could build a React or an Angular app and have it natively be an installable desktop app that does everything, and you're still using HTML, you're still using JavaScript. Now there are libraries in JavaScript for you to get access to the local file system and local things. What does that mean to you? An example, if I were to give one, of an Electron app is Visual Studio Code is written in Electron. All of Visual Studio Code is written in HTML, and it's cross-platform. It runs on a Linux. I've got Raspberry Pi machines at home with Visual Studio Code. I'm on a Mac, it runs on Windows, but it's written in Electron. So ultimately it's the Electron wrapper that's cross-platform, and then it's their JavaScript front end. So if you wanted the most powerful cross-platform desktop app, Electron would be the shell to build it in. Slack is written in Electron. All of these different Teams is written in Electron. They're cross-platform because they're all written with Electron as the backend. So there's a lot to be said about Electron. Nest.js, I'm going to skip over. It's .NET Meetup, but Node, TypeScript, APIs. I love Nest, big fan of Nest. I use QuickType quite a bit. If you want to convert JSON into a .NET class, QuickType It's a website. You just go to quicktype.io. I can paste any JSON in over here on the left, and it'll generate a C#, or it'll generate anything real. I pick C#, it'll generate a strongly typed class in any language, 20 of them maybe here, JavaScript, TypeScript, any of this stuff. I use it for C#. So if I call an API, it gives me some JSON back, I paste it into TypeScript and it generates me a wrapper using Newtonsoft and all the right attributes to map, and then I paste this into my class in my .NET project if I need to, or TypeScript or whatever the case may be, if I need to generate a response from an API. So I use QuickType, used it this week quite a bit for the DevOps stuff. Prettier is a NPM library that will pretty your C# code. It'll reformat your code and convert all your brackets, and you can give it a prettier file. So if everybody wants your code to look the same and just have a similar syntax across all developers, don't worry about harping on your developers to make the change. Just use prettier and just do it across the board. This is a lightweight Kubernetes. It'll load on Windows or Mac. It'll load a full Kubernetes cluster for you with some of the basic settings. If you're into Kubernetes, I'm not going to spend too much time there, but it's kind of cool. It does a whole bunch of stuff for you. If anybody here use Docker Kubernetes? I don't know about people online. Maybe everyone there does, but obviously you can do it yourself. But this is a quick and dirty way for people that aren't as familiar with it. You can install that tool. Next thing, services. Some of these again have been here a long time. Algolia. Now, and I was thinking about this earlier, Alex. What is the Azure Search API that would be the equivalent of Algolia? Is this Azure Search? We use a bunch of Algolia. Algolia is a search API. What that means is it's an API, third-party API that lives out here somewhere. You might have your code in Azure, AWS, whatever. You send them JSON documents. So you give them your data, right? So your data lives in Algolia too. You have to sync up. You might have your own database over here. You have Algolia over here. What Algolia does, what their claim to fame is, and they do it extremely well, is they are a search indexer for giving you the ability to search this extremely fast. Why is it fast? You have an API, they give you a bunch of SDKs, Node, .NET, other things to use their API, and it's fast. But they also do things like if you want Google search or you want to build, this is an Algolia sample, right? Here's a dummy. This is on their website. It's preview.algolia.com. This is the kind of thing you would do with them. I send them my catalog. I give them facets, all of these things. In real time, I search. So now it's not hitting my database. Every time I click on something or unclick on something or expand something or come down here and choose this or move this, in real time, through sockets, it's going out to Algolia and searching my index documents. So all of these are just enough to search. When somebody clicks one, then it goes to a different page, then it hits my database. So my database is never getting hit for this complex, super fast search stuff. I'm paying them and I'm offloading all of that to Algolia. So my database throughput, my cost goes way down because I don't need the horsepower that other people think you need. And ultimately, by the time they click on something, I've got an ID of whatever this is, this particular watch. I go to my database, I just load one thing and I show it. All of the real-time searches, the free ship, everything, all of this real-time is updating behind the scenes in the JavaScript library going straight to Algolia. We use Algolia in a bunch of projects. We look like badasses. My customer's like, this is extremely fast. How fast of a database did you build me? And I'm like, honestly, we're paying nothing for the database. Algolia is doing all the heavy lifting for $40 a month. And we're just sending them all the records that you have. So our records are duplicated. There's some syncing code for me. Somebody updates, in this example, if somebody updated a name over here, like in one of the catalog items, I would also have to sync it to Algolia. There's a nice API to do that. But in the end, extremely fast searching. That's search as a service. And search as a service from a company that does this type of searching, like Walmart or Home Depot or Target, like an e-commerce site that the speed is blazing fast. So we love Algolia.
You would still write that UI then, right?
You'd have to write the UI. But they give you JavaScript libraries, .NET libraries that make it extremely fast. You basically subscribe and it just comes back and it just updates. You know, there's a whole bunch of.
Giving you back your ID column, basically.
Well, they're giving us back any JSON we gave them.
Oh, okay, so it's not in your database again necessarily.
No. Whatever JSON we give them to records, they give us back. And we subscribe. There's a pub sub, and it says somebody just update this facet, the subscription updated, re-render that thing.
Refresh is completely without your own server's involvement.
No, it never hits our API.
It's just a byproduct because what you really want is the search engine.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding. Like your phone, right?
Yeah, no,
So you keep it around, right?
yeah.
And it is extremely fast. It's crazy. Now, there is an Azure Search that does similar. It isn't as polished, but there's a lot of the same capabilities that you can use directly in Azure. So I don't want to say this is.
SDK is not nearly built out.
No, this SDK we have loved. Many of our customers use this. They've used it for 6 years, 7 years. These guys have been around. They're a French company, and we pay them every single month, and I get stats from my customers. A lot of times at Architect Now, when we host stuff in Azure for customers, we also pay for the APIs, and then we bill the customers, and I get all the stats. And it's crazy how much data that we pass through Algolia, and they work very well. Oops. Next, Mailgun. We use Mailgun for our email from code. This is not MailChimp. MailChimp is like a constant contact clone. MailChimp is you want to do email marketing, it goes out of MailChimp. Mailgun's biggest competitor is SendGrid. So SendGrid and Mailgun, probably the two premier companies that do this. Very nice SDKs, JavaScript or Node, .NET. Mailgun does all kinds of crazy email stuff. It is so good for sending emails. And so is SendGrid, honestly. I won't say this. I prefer this. Some people prefer SendGrid. They both do things you might not expect, like webhooks. I know when anyone opens an email, I can send an email via code through Mailgun. It's my SMTP server. It goes out. Anybody opens it, anybody clicks on anything, I get webhooks back. So if I set up webhook listeners, I can build I can send from fake emails a note. I can do all kinds of crazy things for email straight through Mailgun. And SendGrid is the same way. You can spin these both up in Azure. We use Mailgun or SendGrid for all. It's a massive email API for listening and sending things.
SendGrid gets included in your Azure bill.
Do they do a Mailgun Azure?
No,
They don't? I have to pay for this separate.
Using it's easier to.
Yeah, some of our customers do it that way.
With the customer, if they're going to end up paying for it all, you just put it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we do a lot of them.
So mail, we do SendGrid, Mailgun. That's how our email, when I say mail, email, because mail's coming up here. I haven't got there. Email, Twilio. We use Twilio a lot. Anybody here familiar with Twilio? Twilio does your SMS. It does your phone calls. It can call. You get 800 numbers. I can send texts in 3 lines of code. I can send text via Twilio. Came up earlier. It's fractions of a cent to send it to. It still costs. You could set up a complete VoIP phone system. It will do voice recognition in. It will do everything. Twilio is a massive amount of communication products. Messaging, programmable voice, built-in video. You can build crazy stuff with Twilio. Most people don't realize how powerful Twilio is. We used it. We did a COVID vaccination registration back in April. Twilio sent all the reminders. People responded in text to confirm they were going to be there. And it was honestly 20 lines of code to handle all of that. It was crazy. We were sending all these texts to people all over St. Louis saying, hey, you're registered to get your COVID vaccination shot number 1 on this date, shot number 2 2 weeks later. Click yes or no to respond. It came back via Twilio. And in the end, I'm like, this is crazy that it didn't really take me that much code. 10 years ago, this would have been rocket science to actually handle all this. But Twilio gets all the way into video, Twilio Live, real-time communication, like 2 people talking on video. It handles it all as an API. Now you pay, they also have email. Didn't Twilio or somebody, they own SendGrid now, right? I think they did.
Yeah, they bought some good.
Just a year ago, maybe, recently. But we use it generally for SMS, WhatsApp, chat through Slack or Teams. It's pretty crazy what Twilio allows you to do. Somebody just posted in here, Twilio Authy, they have the third-party authenticator as well. Twilio, love Twilio, great friend of mine, Devin Rader, used to work for me for many years. If hopefully Devin hears this stream, he's been at Twilio for many years. Cosmic.js. We use these guys quite a bit too. Pay these guys a lot of money every month. So if you went to, if you went to architectnow.net, and I'm using this as a quick example, if you went to events and you went to past events, these are some past events that we have. If you went to resources, there's a few resources. You have things on our website. We do not use on our website, now this is a simple example, it's just our silly website. We do not use WordPress. We do not use a quote unquote traditional content management system. What do we use? We use Cosmic.js. It's a headless CMS. For $10 a month, I have a full back-end CMS. I can go in and edit blog posts or edit whatever I want, just like WordPress. But to get to that data, it's an API call. So what we did is our website, as an example, uses Angular. And when somebody goes to this resources in an Angular library for Cosmic, we reach out to Cosmic, authenticate and say, give me all the resources here or give me all the events, right? So I get all the benefit of a back-end content management system like WordPress without the overhead of WordPress. It just sits over here, I pay them a monthly fee, manage all my data, set up all my entities, set up all my approval process. You know, I can have contributors go in and edit data and I can approve it. All of that I pay them for. But in the end, there's no quote unquote front end. The front end is whatever I write and I make API calls to get it. So I do like Cosmic. We use it on a number of customers that manage. Architect Now's example is simple, but I got customers that do, you know, hundreds of events every month in their industry or whatever, blog posts, and this is their platform. They're editing this data. Our front end is just reading it and displaying it.
The back end includes
All the authoring, that's what you're paying for. Full embedded, rich HTML authoring and approval process, just like you get at WordPress without the front end. It's just headless. So you got an API, you can do whatever you want with the API. They don't have any, they have plugins. I upload files to them. It does all my file upload. It does all that. We just pull it down on so we manage the front end on our own. Ably, again, I'm running through a lot of these. I know there's more to come. Ably, I like Ably. We haven't used Ably as much. I just turned one of our customers down. Ably is a API. These are services. These are all things you pay for. Cosmic is one, everything, Mailgun. There's a cost to all these. Ably is a real-time pub sub library. There's two of them, Ably and Pusher. Pusher's next, I'll show. But so if you want to do a website, say you've got an API back here, you got a website up here, somebody down here updates some data in your website, you can publish to Ably the change. Other subscribers get the change in real time. If you want to build real-time web apps to where one person can publish, everyone subscribes, and it just bounces through Ably. And it's crazy to scale, millions and millions of rows. So we do messaging. Look at one of my customers does like Facebook messaging. So not Facebook messaging itself, but similar. So if I wanted to chat with you, you send me something, I publish it to an Ably channel. The 2 or 3 other people in the chat channel are subscribed. They get a notification and they just display it in JavaScript and goes into there. So we're chatting in real time with Ably being the middleman. And you can serialize it to a database. The competitor to Ably would be Pusher. Same thing, just different. Libraries for every language, JavaScript, ASP, Ruby, PHP. We use Ably for, it could be a mobile app, saving something, the API publishes it out to all the other mobile apps and the websites update in real time. Charts update, it could be dashboards that update in real time. So Pusher and Ably are similar, but real time. What?
Signal R.
So it'd be a Signal R without all the complexity of setting up Signal R.
What did Firebase fall out of favor?
Firebase would be another way to achieve the same thing without the persistent database. So Firebase is like a Mongo thing, right? They've got everything persisted. This stuff doesn't persist. It's just pass through. But they're all achieving. You could achieve similar results doing all that. Signal R, Firebase, these would all go towards that same thing. But a lot of people don't realize those options exist. They don't think about building apps where there's a real-time synchronization across hundreds and hundreds of people. I could just have dashboards anywhere in the world update because an API updated something over here, and after it saved to the database successfully, it said, hey, I just updated this table. I'm going to pop a message into an Ably channel. Everyone subscribed now gets an updated number, right? And their UI changes in real time. LOB, this is again an old one, but a good one just because, again, there's random stuff. These people do direct mail and address verification. Now, there's other places to do address verification. We used to use this back in the day, and I've kept this here because this is crazy. You can upload PDFs of like postcards or folded, like trifold letters with envelopes, and I could send to an API. They will physically mail something to somebody. Now, there's a cost per thing for print and mail to do international address verification. I mean, it's, I don't know, for $225 a month, you get 3,000 monthly mailings, but honestly, not bad.
Cheaper than doing it yourself.
You could mass mail postcards, full printed glossy postcards. And it's just an API you build into your app. It was crazy. We used this quite a bit back in the day when I was doing college recruiting software. It was nuts. We just make a call, like a kid would come on, and we had a pre-built template. We'd replace on a JPEG their name and some stuff, and a letter would go out. And we just accounted for the cost. So there's APIs that do weird stuff, and that's one that's been here for a while. Stripe, if you're unfamiliar with Stripe, we use Stripe for all of our payment processing. Stripe, Braintree, PayPal, there's ways to take money. It's very easy. Stripe not only takes money from credit cards, we have a significant number of customers that take money from bank accounts. I can transfer money from bank account A to bank account B. So we have customers that have apps that some regard are similar to Airbnb, right? Airbnb, you want to stay somewhere, I take money from your credit card, you're going to stay somewhere for 5 nights for $100 a night, $500, I take money. Well, now that I got the money in my bank account through Stripe, I need to transfer it to your bank account because you're the dude with the room. So Stripe transfers from bank accounts as well. So you can set up temporary bank accounts. You can do all kinds of stuff with Stripe that are beyond just credit card. Like, I'm going to charge a credit card. Too many people think that and PayPal does the same thing. Braintree would be a competitor that does the same thing. So we do a lot of Stripe. Stripe tends to be our go-to anymore, I will say that. Few more here. I'll just pop all these up at the same time. These are all training things. I get asked this a lot. There's more than this, but I get asked this a lot. People ask how we learn stuff. Pluralsight, Udemy, Udacity. Pluralsight's probably the biggest that I send to people. I will say, if you're an Angular, we're an Angular shop primarily. This last one, Ultimate Courses, is the one we spend the most money on by far. They have an Angular course, and we buy it for every developer, and we pay $300 or $400 every time I hire a developer. That $300 or $400, I think it's something like that, $400 maybe, is a sunk cost that goes in, and they love it. It's full TypeScript. It's a weird, smallish company compared to these other people. They're nowhere near the size, but the content is we've had the best luck with. Our team has gone through it. We love it. And